Hello. Welcome back to my channel. Let's continue. Prioritize your presence. Sorry, poetize, poeticize your presence. Important things happen when your targets are alone. The slightest feelings of relief that you are not there, and it is all over. Familiarity and overexposure will cause this reaction. Remain elusive then so that when you are away, they will yearn to see you again and will associate you only with pleasant thoughts. Occupy their minds by alter- alternating an exciting presence with a cool distance, exuberant moments followed by calculated absence. Associate yourself with poetic images and objects so that when they think of you, they begin to see you through an idealized halo. The more you figure in their minds, the more they will envelop you in seductive fantasies. Feed these fantasies by subtle inconsistencies and changes in your behavior. Poetic presence absence. In 1949, the Argentine military overthrew the government. A popular 48-year-old Colonel Juan Perón was named Secretary of Labor and Social Affairs. Perón was a widow who had a fondness for young girls. At the time of his appointment, he was involved with a teenager whom he introduced to one and all as his daughter. One evening in January of 1949, Perón was seated among the other military leaders in a Buenos Aires stadium, attending an artist festival. It was late and there were some empty seats around him. Out of nowhere, two beautiful young actresses asked him present to sit down. Were they joking? He would be delighted. He recognized one of the actresses. It was Eva Duarte, a star of radio soap operas, whose photograph was often on the covers of the tabloids. The other actress was younger and prettier, but Perón could not take his eyes off Eva, who was talking to another colonel. She was really not his type at all. She was 24, far too old for his taste. She was dressed rather garishly, and there was something a little icy in her manner, but she looked at him occasionally, and her glance excited him. He looked away for a moment, and the next thing he knew, she had changed seats and was sitting next to him. They started to talk. She hung on his every word. Yes, everything he said was precisely how she felt. The poor, the workers, they were the future of Argentina. She had known poverty herself. There were almost tears in her eyes when she said, at the end of the conversation, "Thank you for existing." In the next few days, Eva managed to get rid of Perron's daughter and establish herself in his apartment. Everywhere he turned, there she was, fixing his meals, caring for him when he was ill, advising him on politics. Why did he let her stay? Usually he would have a fling with a superficially young girl, then get rid of her when she seemed to be sticking around too much. But there was nothing superficial about Eva. As time went by, he found herself getting addicted to the feelings she gave him. She was intensely loyal, mirroring his every idea, puffing him up endlessly. He felt more masculine in her presence. That was it, and more powerful. She believed he would make the country's ideal leader, and her belief affected him. She was like the women in the tango ballads she loved so much, the suffering women of the streets who became saintly mother figures and looked after their men. Perron saw her every day, but he never felt He fully knew her. One day her comments were a little obscene. The next she was the perfect lady. He had one worry. She was angling to get married, and he could never marry her. She was an actress with a dubious past. The other colonels were already scandalized by his involvement with her. Nevertheless, the affair went on. In 1945, Perrin was dismissed from his post in jail. The colonels feared his growing popularity and distrusted the power of his mistress, who seemed to have a total influence over him. It was the first time in almost 2 years that he was truly alone and truly separated from Eva. Suddenly he felt new emotions sweeping over him. He pinned her photographs all over the wall outside. Massive strikes were being organized to protest his imprisonment, but all he could think about was Eva. She was a saint, a woman of destiny, a heroine. He wrote to her, "It is only being apart from loved ones that we can measure our affection. From the day I left you, I have not been able to calm my sad heart. My immense solitude is full of your memory." Now he promised to marry her. The strikes grew in intensity. After 8 days, Perron was released from prison. He promptly married Eva. A few months later, he was elected president and first lady. Eva attended state functions in her somewhat gaudy dresses and jewelry. She was seen as former actress with a large wardrobe. Then in 1947, she left for a tour of Europe, and followed. Argentines followed her every move. The ecstatic crowds that greeted her in Spain, her audience with the Pope, and in her absence, their opinion of her changed. How well she represented the Argentina spirit, its noble simplicity, its its flair for drama. When she returned a few weeks later, they overwhelmed her with attention. Eva too had changed during her trip to Europe. Now her dyed blonde hair was pulled into a severe chignon, and she wore tailored suits. It was a serious look, befitting a woman who was to become the savior of the poor. Soon her image could be seen everywhere, her initials on the walls, the sheets, the towels of the hospitals for the poor, her profile on the jersey of a soccer team from the poorest part of Argentina, whose club she sponsored, her giant smiling face covering the sides of buildings. Since finding out anything personal about her had become impossible, all kinds of elaborate fantasies began to spring up about her. And when cancer cut her life short in 1959 at the age of 33, the age of Christ when he died, the country went into mourning. Millions filed past her embalmed body. She was no longer a radio actress, a wife, a first lady, but Evita, a saint. Interpretation: Eva Duarte was an illegitimate child who had grown up in a poverty, escaped to Buenos Aires to become an actress, and been forced to do many thwarty things to survive and get ahead in the theater world. Her dream was to escape all of the constraints on her future, for she was intensely ambitious. Perron was the perfect victim. He managed himself a great leader, but the reality was that he was fast becoming a lecherous old man who was too weak to raise himself up. Eva injected poetry into his life. Her language was florid and theatrical. She surrounded him with attention, indeed to the point of suffocation, but a woman's dutiful service to a great man was a classic image, and was celebrated in innumerable tango ballads. Yet she managed to remain elusive, mysterious, like a movie star you see all the time on the screen but never really know. And when Perron was finally alone in prison, these poetic images and association burst forth in his mind. He idolized her madly. As far as he was concerned, she was no longer an actress with a torrid past. She seduced an entire nation the same way. The street was her dramatic poetic presence, combined with a touch of elusive distance. Over time, you would see whatever you wanted to in her. To this day, to this day, people fantasize about what Eva was really like. Familiarity destroys seduction. This rarely happens early on. There is so much to learn about a new person, but a midpoint may arrive when the target has begun to idolize and fantasize about you, only to discover that you are not what he or she thought. It is not a question of being seen too often, of being too available, as some imagine. In fact, if your targets see you too rarely, you give them nothing to feed on, and their attention may be caught by someone else. You have to occupy their mind. It is more a matter of being too consistent, too obvious, too human and real. Your targets cannot idolize you if they know too much about you. If they start to see you as all too human, not only must you maintain a degree of distance, but there must be something fantastical and bewitching about you, sparking all kinds of delightful possibilities into their mind. The possibility Eva held out was the possibility that she was what in Argentine culture was considered the ideal woman, devoted, motherly, saintly. But there are any number of poetic ideals you can try to embody. Chivalry, adventure, romance, and so on, as just as potent. And if you have a whiff of them about you, you can breathe enough poetry into the air to fill people's mind with fantasies and dreams. At all costs, you must embody something, even if it is roguery and evil, anything to avoid the taint of familiarity and commonness. What I need is a woman who is something, anything, either very beautiful or very kind, or in the last resort, every wicked, very witty, or very stupid, but something. Alfred de Musset. Keys to seduction. We all have a self-image that is more flattering than the truth. We think of ourselves as more generous, selfless, honest, kind, intelligent, or good-looking than in fact we are. It is extremely difficult for us to be honest with ourselves about our own limitations. We have a desperate need to idolize ourselves, as the writer Angela Carter remarks. We would rather align ourselves with angels than with the higher primates from which we are really descended. This need to idolize extends to our romantic entanglements, because when we fall in love or under the spell of another person, we see a reflection of ourselves. The choice we make in deciding to become involved with another person reveals something important and intimate about us. We resist seeing ourselves as having fallen for someone who is cheap or tacky or tasteless, because it reflects badly on who we are. Furthermore, we are often likely to fall for someone who resembles us in some way. Should that person be deficient, or worst of all, ordinary, then there is something deficient or an ordinary about us. No, at all costs, the loved one must be overvalued and idolized, at least for the sake of our own self-esteem. Besides, in a world that is harsh and full of disappointment, it is a great pleasure to be able to fantasize about a person you are involved with. This makes the seducer's task easy. People are trying to be given the chance to fantasize about you. Do not spoil this golden opportunity by overexposing yourself or becoming so familiar and banal that the target sees you exactly as you are. You do not have to be an angel or a paragon of virtue. That would be quite boring. You can be dangerous, naughty, even somewhat vulgar, depending on the taste of your victim, but never be ordinary or limited. In poetry, as opposed to reality, anything is possible. Soon after we fall under a person's spells, we form an image in our minds of who they are and what pleasures they might offer. Thinking of them when we are alone, we tend to make this image more and more idealized. The novelist Stendhal, in his book on love, calls this phenomenon crystallization, telling the story of how in Salzburg, Austria, they used to throw leafless branches into the abandoned depths of a salt mine in the middle of winter. When the branch was pulled out months later, it would be covered with spectacular crystals. That is what happens to a loved one in our minds. According to Stendhal, though there are two crystallizations, the first happens when we first meet the person. The second and more important one happens later, when a bit of doubt creeps in. You desire the other person, but they elude you. You are not sure they are yours. This bit of doubt is critical. It makes your imagination work double, deepens the poeticizing process. In the 17th century, the great Frederick the Duste Lusnin pulled off one of the most spectacular seductions in history, that of the Grand Madame Mouchy, the cousin of King Louis, and the wealthiest and most powerful woman in France. He tickled her imagination with a few brief encounters at the court, letting her catch glimpses of his wit, his audacity, his cool manner. She would begin to think of him when she was alone. Next, she started to bump into him more often at court, and they would have little conversations or walks. When these meetings were over, she would be left with a doubt: is he or is he not interested in me? This made her want to see him more. In order to allay her doubts, she began to analyze him all out of proportion to the reality, for the Duke was an incorrigible scoundrel. Remember, if you are easily had, you cannot be worth that much. It is hard to wax poetic about a person who comes to so cheaply. If after the initial interest you make it clear that you cannot be taken for granted, if you store a bit of doubt, the target will imagine there is something special, lofty, and unattainable about you. Your image will crystallize in the other person's mind. Cleopatra knew that she was really no different from any other woman, and in fact her face was not particularly beautiful, but she knew that men have a tendency to overvalue a woman. All that is required is to hint that there is something different about you, to make them associate you with something grand or poetic. She made Caesar aware of her connection to the great king and queens of Egypt's past with Antony. She created the fantasy that she was descended from Aphrodite herself. These men were courting not just with a strong-willed woman, but a kind of goddess. Such associations might be difficult to pull off today, but people still get deep pleasures from associating others with some kind of childhood fantasy figures. John F. Kennedy presented himself as a figure of chivalry, noble, brave, charming. Pablo Picasso was not just a great painter with a thirst for young girls. He was the miniature of Greek legend, or the devilish trickster figure that is so seductive to women. These associations shouldn't be made too early. They are only powerful once the target has begun to fall under your spell and is vulnerable to suggestion. A man who had just met Cleopatra would have found the Aphrodite association ludicrous, but a person who is falling in love will believe almost anything. The trick is to associate your image with something mythic. Through the clothes you wear, the things you say, the places you go. In Marcel Proust's novel, Remember of Things Past. Remembrance of Things Past. The character Swan finds himself gradually seduced by a woman who is not really his type. He is an aesthete. He is an aesthete and loves her finer things in life. She is of a lower class, less refined, even a little tasteless, but poeticizes her. In his mind is a series of exuberant moments they share together, moments that from then on he associates with her. One of these is a concert in a salon that they attend, in which he is intoxicated by a little melody in a sonata. Whenever he thinks of her, he remembers this little phrase, little gifts she has given him, objects she has touched or handled begin to assume a life of their own. Any kind of heightened experience, artistic or spiritual, lingers in the mind much longer than normal experience. You must find a way to share such moments with your targets, a concert, a play, a spiritual encounter, whatever it takes, so that they associate something elevated with you. Shared moments of exuberance have immense seductive pull. Also, any kind of object can be imbued with poetic resonance and sentimental associations. As discussed in the last chapter, the gifts you give and other objects can become imbued with your presence. If they are associated with pleasant memories, the sight of them keeps you in mind and accelerates the poeticization process. Although it is said that absence makes the heart grow fonder, and absence too early will prove deadly to the crystallization process. Eva Peron, you must surround your targets with focused attention so that in those critical moments, when they are alone, their mind is spinning with a kind of afterglow. Do everything you can to keep the target thinking about you. Letters, mementos, gifts, unexpected meetings, all this give you an omnipresence. Everything must remind them of you. Finally, if your target should see you as elevated and poetic, there is much to be gained by making them feel elevated and poeticized in their turn. The French writer Chateaubriand would make a woman feel like a goddess. She had such a powerful effect on him. He would send her poems that she supposedly had inspired to make Queen Victoria feel as if she were both a seductive woman and a great leader. Benjamin Disraeli would compare her to mythological figures and great predecessors such as Queen Elizabeth I. By idolizing your targets this way, you will make them idolize you in return, since you must be equally great to be able to appreciate and see all of their fine qualities. They will also grow addicted to the elevated feelings you give them. Symbol: the halo. Slowly, when the target is alone, he or she begins to imagine a kind of faint glow around your head, formed by all of the possible pleasures you might offer, the radiance of your charged presence, your noble qualities. The halo separates you from other people. Do not make it disappear by becoming familiar and ordinary. Reversal. It might seem that the reverse tactic would be to reveal everything about yourself, to be completely honest about your faults and virtues. This kind of sincerity was a quality Lord Byron had. He almost got a thrill out of disclosing all of his nasty, ugly qualities, even going so far later on his life as to tell people about his incestuous involvement with his half-sister. This kind of dangerous intimacy can be immensely seductive. The target will poeticize your vices and you're honest about them. They will start to see more than is there. In other words, the idolization process is unavoidable. The only thing that cannot be idolized is mediocrity. But there is nothing seductive about mediocrity. There is no possible way to seduce without creating some kind of fantasy and poeticization. Disarms through strategic weaknesses and vulnerability. Too much maneuvering on your part may raise suspicion. The best way to cover your tracks is to make the other person feel superior and stronger. If you seem to be weak, vulnerable, enthralled by the other person, and unable to control yourself, you will make your actions look more natural, less calculated. Physical weakness, tears, bashfulness, paleness will help create the effect. To further win trust, exchange honesty for words to establish your sincerity by confessing some sin on your part. It doesn't have to be real. Sincerity is more important than goodness. Play the victim, then transform your target sympathy into love. The victim strategy. That sweltering August in the 1770s, when the Presidente da Tuvarel was eating the shit out of our old friend Madame de Rosamande, leaving her husband at home. She was expecting to be enjoying the peace and quiet of country life more or less on her own, but she loved the simple pleasures, and soon her daily life at the Chita assumed a comfortable pattern. Daily mass, walks in the country, charitable work in the neighboring villages, and card games in the evening. When Madame de Rosamande's nephew arrived for a visit, then the Presidente felt uncomfortable, but also curious. The nephew, the Vicomte de Valmont, was the most notorious libertine in Paris. He was certainly handsome, but he was not what she had expected. He seemed sad, somewhat downtrodden, and strangest of all, he paid hardly any attention to her. The Presidente was no coquette. She dressed simply, ignored fashions, and loved her husband. Still, she was young and beautiful, and was used to fending off men's attentions. In the back of her mind, she was slightly perturbed that he took so little notice of her. Then, at mass one day, she caught glimpses of Valmont, apparently lost in prayer. The idea dawned on her that he was in the midst of a period of soul searching. As soon as word had leaked out that Valmont was at the Chittao, the Presidente had received a letter from a friend warning her against this dangerous man, but she thought of herself as the last one in the world to be vulnerable to him. Besides, he seemed on the verge of repenting his evil past. Perhaps she could help move him in that direction. What a wonderful victory that would be for God. And so the Presidente took note of Valmont's comings and goings, trying to understand what was happening, and he said it was strange, for instance, that he would often leave in the mornings to go hunting, yet would never return with any game. One day, she decided to have her servant do a little harmless spying, and she was amazed and delighted to learn that Valmont had not gone hunting at all. He had visited a local village where he had doled out money to a poor family about to be evicted from their home. Yes, she was right. His passionate soul was moving from sensuality to virtue. How happy that made her feel. That evening, Valmont and the Presidente found themselves alone for the first time, and Valmont suddenly burst out with a startling confession. He was head over heels in love with the Presidente, and with a love he had never experienced before. Her virtue, her goodness, her beauty, her kind ways had completely overwhelmed him. His generosity to the poor that afternoon had been for her sake, perhaps inspired by her, perhaps something more sinister. It has been to impress her. He would never have confessed to this, but finding himself alone with her, he could not control his emotions. Then he got down on his knees and begged for her to help him, to guide him in his misery. The President was caught off guard and began to cry intensely. Embarrassed, she ran from the room, and for the next few days pretended to be ill. She did not know how to react to the letters. Valmont now began to send her, begging her to forgive him. He praised her beautiful face and her beautiful soul, and claimed she had made him rethink his whole life. These emotional letters produced disturbing emotions, and Toverell provided herself on her calmness and prudence. She knew she should insist that he leave the Chitao, and wrote him to that effect. He reluctantly agreed, but on one condition, that she allow him to write on her from Paris. She consented as long as the letters were not offensive. When he told Madame de Rosemonde that he was leaving, the president felt a pang of guilt. His hostess and aunt would miss him, and he looked so pale. He was obviously suffering. Now the letters from Wellman began to arrive, and Tourelle soon regretted allowing him his liberty. He ignored her request that he avoid the subject of love. Indeed, he vowed to love her forever. He rebuked her for her coldness and insensitivity. He explained his bad path in life. It was not his fault. He had no direction, had been led astray by others. Without her help, he would fall back into the world. Do not be cruel, he said. You are the one who seduced me. Seduced me. I am your slave, the victim of your charms and goodness. Since you are strong and do not feel as I do, you have nothing to fear. Indeed, the president and the Tourelle came to pity Valmont. He seemed so big, so out of control. How could she help him? And why was she even thinking of him? Which she now did more and more. She was a happily married woman. No, she must at least put an end to this tiresome correspondence. No more talk of love, she wrote, or she would not reply. His letters stopped coming. She felt relief, finally some peace and quiet. One evening, however, as she was seated at the dinner table, she suddenly heard Wellman's voice from behind her, addressing Madame de Rosemonde. On the spur of the moment, he said he had decided to return for a short visit. She felt a shiver up and down her spine. Her face flushed. He approached and sat down beside her. He looked at her. She looked away, and soon made an excuse to leave the table and go up to her room. But she could not completely avoid him over the next few days, and she saw that he seemed paler than ever. He was polite, and a whole day might pass without her seeing him. But this brief absence had a paradoxical effect. Now Tourelle realized what had happened. She missed him. She wanted to see him. This paragon of virtue and goodness had somehow fallen in love with an incorrigible Ray. Disgusted with herself and what she had allowed to happen, she left the town in the middle of the night without telling anyone, and headed for Paris, where she planned somehow to repent this awful sin. Interpretation: the character of Valmont in Cordelos the Laclos epistolar novel Dangerous Liaisons is based on several of the great real-life libertines of 18th century France. Everything Valmont does is calculated for effect. The ambiguous actions that make Tourelle curious about him, the act of charity in the village he knows he is being followed, the return visit to the chateau, the paleness of his face, he is having an affair with a girl at the chateau, and their all-night carousels gave him a wasted look. Most devastating of all is his positioning for himself as the weak one, the seduced, the victim. How can the president imagine he is manipulating her when everything suggests he is simply overwhelmed by her beauty, whether physical or spiritual? He cannot be a deceiver when he repeatedly makes a point of confessing the truth about himself. He admits that his charity was questionably unmotivated. He explains why he has gone astray. He lets her in on his emotions. All of this honesty, of course, he is calculated. In essence, he is like a woman, or at least like a woman of those times, emotional, unable to control himself, moody, insecure. She is the one who is cold and cruel, like a man. In positioning himself as Tourelle's victim, Valmont can not only disguise his manipulations but elicit pity and concern. Playing the victim, he can stir up the tender emotions produced by a sick child or a wounded animal. And these emotions are easily channeled into love, as the president discovers to her dismay. Seduction is a game of reducing suspicion and resistance. The cleverest way to do this is to make the other person feel stronger, more in control of things. Suspicion usually comes out of insecurities. If your targets feel superior and secure in your presence, they are likely to doubt your motives. You are too weak, too emotional, to be up to something. Take this game as far as it will go. Flaunt your emotions and how deeply they have affected you. Making people feel the power they have over you is immensely flattering to them. Confess to something bad, or even to something bad that you did or contemplated doing. To them, honesty is more important than virtue, and one honest gesture will blind them to men's deceitful acts, create an impression of weakness. Physical, mental, emotional strength and confidence can be frightening, make your weakness a comfort, and play the victim of their power over you, of circumstances, of life in general. This is the best way to cover your tracks. A man ain't worth a damn if he can cry at the right time. Lyndon Baines Johnson. Bye.